I don't tell this story to colleagues anymore because I can see their faces change halfway through. Polite focus turning into something guarded, like I've wandered over an invisible line and dragged their attention somewhere it doesn't want to go. But I can't stop replaying it, and on nights when the fluorescent lights off the storage room flicker and the hum of the vents goes monotone like a held breath, I hear the sound of wheels that didn't roll and a voice that shouldn't have reached me, and I remember the patient who vanished. My name is Mara. I've been an ER trauma nurse for 8 years at St. Augustine Memorial, a mid-sized hospital that pretends to be bigger than it is because the highway T-bones the city and spills us a steady stream of broken bodies, overdoses, and unlucky hearts at any hour. There's a mural in the lobby, angel wings and a sunrise over the river, but the emergency department sits in the bowels, where paint peels in corners and the floors hold the scuffs of gurneys and impatience. I grew up 2 towns over, daughter of a high school custodian and a night shift diner waitress. I learned early that the world runs on the people who see what's spilled and clean it anyway. I chose nursing because I wanted to be the hands that steadied someone when the line between staying and going began to thin, and because I believed we could make that line hold. Belief changes its shape after enough long nights. This one began like a lot of them do. 1900 check-in, coffee that tasted like the pot remembered heat rather than contained it, and the pre-shift huddle, where the charge nurse, Tasha, did her braid like a rope and read out the board. 2 psych holds awaiting transfer, 1 septic workup in 9A, an elderly fall in 3B, and a gunshot from the east side en route with ETA 10 minutes. The air had that taut quality, IV saline, alcohol wipes, the metallic promise of blood that tells you the quiet is lying. Trauma Bay 1 was set, monitor leads coiled, suction checked, tubed trash kit cracked open, just enough to know it would give. I felt good, the way you do when the room is ordered and you know the order won't last. Paramedics burst through our doors like they own the threshold, which they do in a way. Possession through necessity. At 1914, the gunshot. Young man, early 20s, single wound mid-abdomen with an exit we couldn't immediately find because the backboard was taped like a mummy. Field vitals barely a suggestion of pressure. We moved on, instinct, airway clear, breathing shallow, circulation barely showing up to the party. The surgeon on call, Dr. Malik, arrived with that fast walk stillness of someone who can put his mind through a problem faster than his feet can carry him. We hung blood, we cut clothing. We found the exit wound, lateral and posterior. We packed, we rolled, we scanned. It was standard chaos, if you can call the kind where minutes stretch into an elastic that can snap at any time. Standard. Somewhere between the second unit of blood and the surgeon's hands pressing down like gravity on cloth, I caught a smell, iodine and bile, and the faint sweetness you never want to notice because it means internal compromise. And I pushed the thought away. He went to the OR alive, but in the flimsiest sense, like a candle in a draft. We stripped the room, the floor sticky, with what we pretend is a mess and not a history. There's a rhythm to that, the reset. Peroxide and scrub brushes, fresh linen, new monitor cables coiled like obedient serpents, the mundane mercy of readying a space. During the debrief at the nurse's station afterward, voices overlapped. The COPD in 12 complaining about waiting, the septuagenarian in 3B fretting about her cat, the psych-hold trying to sing to himself, a lullaby turned wrong in a grown man's voice. The ER at night is a chorus of human tics. Tasha put me on triage overflow and trauma bay 1 again because I'm quick with setups and slower to panic than I used to be. When you've had a teenager die with his mother's name in his mouth, you learn how to anchor your hands even if your insides are water. It was around 21:03 when the call came in from EMS, single car rollover, unknown age female, initially responsive, now altered, hypotensive. They gave us the usual. Scene time, vitals, suspect head injury, belly soft but tender, GCS trending from 13 to 10 en route. They didn't like the way her pupils reacted, irregular and slow, and they'd hit a bump in the county road, where the pavement buckles near the river. One of them swore she said something, and then went quiet. I remember the paramedic's voice because it had that catch in it. professional, but threaded with a human concern that things were tilting toward bad. Trauma Bay 1 again. X-ray tech on standby. Respiratory paged. Malik still scrubbed in upstairs, but his partner, Dr. Han, on the way. I laid out the airway tray, traced gloved fingers along tubes, checked cuffs with a little squeeze that felt like asking a question before the answer arrived. I looked at the empty gurney and felt something like a tension, focused and hungry, pooling in the room. Sometimes you can tell before the patient's here that the night is going to pick a fight with your sense of order. The doors swung, and she came in with the smell of wet gravel and antifreeze clinging to her clothes. Late 20s, maybe 30, hair dark and plastered to her temple with a stripe of blood like a finger of paint. Pale, not the gentle pallor of someone with low iron, but the draining color of a person whose body is shifting resources to the center, leaving the edges to frost. She had a thin gold chain around her neck, the kind you put on and forget, and a scrap of torn paper shoved into the pocket of her jeans that would not matter until it did, and then it would matter too much. Name? I asked, even though we both knew names sometimes come later. The medic glanced at me. Wallet, says Lena, responds to pain, pressure in the 80s, fluids running, pupils unequal, left sluggish. Lena. She was smaller than I first thought, the bone architecture of her face severe when you looked past the swelling. I did what we do. Airway first, watch her chest rise, listen to breath sounds, note the wetness, the whisper at the bases that made me think of contusion or aspiration. Her skin was cool. The monitor beeped a rhythm I didn't trust. It lagged, it hesitated, or maybe that was me projecting my own reluctance to trust anything we couldn't touch. Dr. Han arrived and took in the room with a sweep, his voice the kind that makes your shoulders drop, even when what he's saying should make you tense. Let's get a fast, he said. CBC, CMP, type and cross, lactate, ABG, portable chest and pelvis, keep her warm. I placed the probe for the fast exam, that urgent ultrasound we do to find free fluid in the belly, the kind that means blood is drifting where it doesn't belong. The screen showed black pockets where there shouldn't be. Han's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. Positive in Morrison's pouch, he said, almost to himself, and then to the room. We may have an intra-abdominal bleed. I felt Lena's hand twitch under the blanket, fingers seeking. I put my gloved hand over hers and said, softly because this is a superstition I carry, that we would stay with her the whole time, that we would not leave her alone. Her lips moved. Cold, she said, voice a ghost shiver. I pulled the bear hugger blanket over her, the sound of the warm air whooshing like a small wind. Her pressure dipped again, numbers descending like a child on a slide that ends too quickly. Let's hang Oneg, Han said, and I was already spiking the bag, the heavy red weight of it familiar and sobering. The blood warmed in the transfuser. The tubing had that slight tremble of flow that I always find reassuring, as if the solution is eager to do what it was meant to. Her face softened for a moment, the kind of micro-change you learn to read when you've watched people dance on thresholds. I looked at the monitor and back at her. The beeping settled into a slow, steady cadence. CT as soon as we can roll, Han said. I want eyes on the head and abdomen. The corridor to CT is always too long when you're pushing someone who might not make the distance. We moved as a unit, me on the IVs and monitor, respiratory at the head with the bag valve mask ready, Han at her side, the techs clearing a path like a snowplow in a blizzard of minor emergencies. You learn how to shout politely in an ER coming through, with enough command that people jump without feeling scolded. As we turned the corner by the supply closet, Lena's eyes opened. Not the fluttering open of someone drifting up for air, but the bright, fixed open of a person who has spotted something they didn't expect to see. She stared past my shoulder. I felt the hair on the back of my neck lift in a silent response my body has learned around caves and alleys, and apparently corridors at 2136. It's not mine, she whispered. Her voice was clear, each word a bead. What isn't? I asked, Because you always ask, and sometimes the answer tells you what direction to run in. The voice, she said. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a sound like static in the absence of music. The transport elevator groaned. We reached CT, and the room greeted us with its cold, indifferent donut of a machine. The CT tech, Nadim, meets fear with jokes, but he didn't joke tonight. We slid Lena onto the table, her body compliant in a way that makes you want to apologize to it. I taped her IV line safe, checked the blood strip, checked the monitor again. The numbers were behaving. The monitor is a liar sometimes, but it knows the language we like to hear. We did the head first. The scanner sang its sterile song. Hold still, Nadim said, and I gripped the edge of the table like it was me he was asking. The images populated in slices of grayscale life. Han leaned toward the screen, narrowed eyes, took in the contours of a brain that might have leaked. Small subdural, he said. Left frontal. Not emergent evacuate now, but she's fragile. Abdomen next. The machine circled like a predator. I watched Lena's chest rise. I counted. I adjusted the flow when her fingers blanched. The images of her belly began to resolve, and even I could see the pooling, where there should be clean organ outlines. Free fluid that wasn't theoretical anymore. Spleen, Han said. Grade 3, maybe 4. She needs the OR. I didn't hit anyone, Lena said. Her eyes were open again, and she wasn't looking at me anymore but at the ceiling panel where the building's ductwork left a hairline crack. I didn't hit anyone. Tell him. Tell who, Lena? I asked. Her gaze didn't waver. The man by the river, she said. Nadim and I traded a glance, and in it was the same thought dressed in different clothes. People say strange things when they're hurt. The brain does triage too, and sometimes speech is where the compromise shows. We got the images we needed, and I called upstairs for OR clearance, my voice reading numbers like a prayer. We started rolling back, and the hallway felt lonelier than on the way down, which is odd because we were bringing with us a plan. That's usually when the world seems to expand again. It contracted instead. At the intersection by radiology, we had to stop for a second. Code blue coming through from the ICU. The parade that always makes any ER crew press themselves to walls with a respectful, silent dread. In that momentary pause, Lena turned her head without moving her body. My son is 6, she said. His name is Micah. I nodded, even though she wasn't looking at me, because that's what you do when someone hands you a stake that anchors them to the earth. We'll call him, I promised, knowing that we would call someone, that a chain of calls would ripple out, that a boy would be woken or spared or told or not told, and that in any case, the night would leave fingerprints on him. We kept going. We moved through the doors back toward Trauma 1, and that's when something happened that I still do not know how to place, in a world that pretends cause and effect are faithful lovers. The gurney hit an invisible seam, a shift of the wheels I can still feel in my hands. The monitor squawked, a hiccup and a flat tone, only for a breath like it had tried to imagine a disaster and then thought better of it. I looked down at Lena to check leads in line, and there was a shape where she should have been. The drape pulled, the impression of her weight lifting like a slow exhale, and then there was not. The gurney was empty. The straps lay open like someone had unbuckled them with an unhurried hand. The blood still dripped into nothing, the line arcing to the blank space like a sentence hanging toward a missing word. I swear the air had weight, where she should have been, the ghost of pressure on the mattress, a remembered body. There are things your mind does when it is confronted with an absurdity. It looks for the trick. It looks for your own error. It searches the edges where a reasonable explanation could have been hiding. I checked under the gurney like a person searches for a childish version of physics. I checked the hall behind us, as if Lena had slipped past with the stealth of a cat. Han swore, quiet and ugly, a word that made sense, because nothing else did. Nadim's mouth fell open and stayed that way, like his body had forgotten its usual choreography. Respiratory let out a single syllable that had no language in it. We locked eyes, all of us, and saw our own disbelief mirrored back. Then the radio on my hip crackled with a voice I knew by tone before words. the paramedic from the rollover. He sounded wrong, pitched like he was talking in a room that wasn't ours. We're 5 minutes out with a female, late 20s, name maybe Lena. Lost her near the river, found her again wandering. Pressure low, GCS fluctuating. I looked at the empty gurney. I looked at the monitor, still beeping a rhythm for a patient who wasn't there. The blood bag tapped lightly against the pole, a metronome for a song we didn't know. And then I did the merciless math. If what he was saying was true, if time hadn't broken and come to sit in our hallway with us, then we had 2 Lenas or 1 Lena twice. I heard myself say, in a voice that sounded like it belonged to someone pragmatic and infuriatingly calm, "Prep a second bay. Keep this line running. No one disconnects anything." Han moved first, a choice I was grateful to borrow strength from. "Lock the doors to CT corridor," he told the clerk at the desk through the intercom. "Call security. No one gets in here who doesn't need to be in here." He turned to me. "Mara, stay with this. I want eyes on the monitor, and that line, like they're the only true things left tonight." I nodded and did what he asked, because it gave my body something to do in a place where my mind was starting to place its hands on the walls, just to feel what was solid. I kept my fingers on the IV line and felt the warmth-like evidence. I thought of Micah, 6, asleep somewhere, or awake and doing what 6-year-olds do at 9:50 p.m. when the house hasn't settled yet. I thought of the piece of paper in her jeans pocket and how sometimes the smallest artifact becomes the lantern you use to see your way through a room. I told myself, quietly because it's another superstition, that the world has rules, even when we're not being fair to them. And then the doors at the end of the hall opened, and there she was again, or there she was for the first time, depending on which part of your brain you were letting drive. The medic's face confirmed it. Same woman. Same hair pasted to her temple, same gold chain, same wrong pallor, same lurching breath that made you want to persuade oxygen to carry more than it can. He looked right at me over the rails of the gurney and said, "We lost her for a minute near the bridge, and then..." He stopped because words had to crawl past a barrier none of us could see. "We've got her now." I looked from the empty gurney with its beeping lie to the arriving body whose pulse I could see in her throat. And later I would have time to catalog the ways terror makes the world bright and precise. The corners of tape, the threaded cap on a saline lock, the tear in a scrub sleeve. But in that moment, all I knew was that the night had decided to pull a thread none of our training covered, and it was unspooling fast. Which Lena is real? What if they both are? These are the questions I can't escape when I replay that night. Questions that landed heavier than any scalpel or syringe I've ever held. Because in front of me stood a body that breathed, bled, and whispered fragments of a life, while behind me a monitor still insisted on tracking the vitals of someone who wasn't there. Again I ask, which Lena is real? What if they both are? Those questions clanged in my head with the rhythm of the monitor, each beep driving the uncertainty deeper, like nails being tapped into the frame of a house that shouldn't be standing. Because when the second gurney arrived, when paramedics wheeled in the woman who looked exactly like the one I'd just sworn had vanished into thin air, the world split for me. My training, my years in trauma nursing, all the order and protocols we cling to, they were suddenly 2 thin strings stretched over a canyon that had opened beneath my feet. I gripped both, but I knew neither would hold. The paramedics rolled her in fast, calling vitals as if speaking louder could convince them into stability. Female, late 20s, responsive to pain but altered, systolic in the 70s, tachy at 130, pupils still unequal. Their voices were urgent, insistent, trying to keep things in the realm of the explainable. I wanted to believe them. I wanted to stay in the realm of numbers, fluids, and pharmacology. But I kept glancing behind me at Trauma Bay 1, where the empty gurney waited, where the monitors still ticked out a false rhythm, each green line mocking my sense of reality. "Doctor." Han's face didn't betray much, but I saw the tightness around his jaw, the little twitch in his cheek. He was trained for trauma, not for paradox. "Bay 2. He ordered, his voice sharp enough to slice through the fog. "Get her in Bay 2. We split, the team like a body suddenly given two conflicting impulses, arms reaching both ways. Respiratory followed the new arrival. A tech ran for another warmer, another crash cart. Nadim, the CT tech, stood frozen for half a beat, his eyes darting between the gurneys like a man trying to decide which world to belong to. I touched his sleeve and whispered, "Go with them." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. I stayed. Because someone had to keep watch over the lie in Bay 1. Someone had to stay with the phantom that was still being tracked by machines that didn't know how to lie in unison. The IV bag still dripped into emptiness, the tubing feeding nothing, a grotesque pantomime of care. I checked the tubing again, even though I knew it was absurd. Warm blood still coursed through the line, still filled the drip chamber, still trembled its way toward a body that wasn't there. I pressed my hand against the mattress, half expecting resistance, half hoping to feel even a ghost of weight. Nothing. Just the hum of the bed's motor and the faint warmth left behind. Like a body-shaped memory. From the other bay came the sounds I knew so well, commands clipped and urgent, gloves snapping, suction roaring, the shuffling of feet as people moved around a fragile human center. Then Lena's voice, hoarse but distinct, floated across the space. I told him, I didn't hit anyone. The same words she'd said before. The exact same cadence. My stomach dropped like a gurney missing a wheel. I turned to the empty bed and whispered, not meaning to, "Which one are you?" The monitor answered with a steady beep, as though mocking the question with a heartbeat it claimed to still see. Minutes stretched. In trauma, time usually compresses. You blink and it's 30 minutes later. The whole world bent around keeping someone alive. But this time, each second elongated, merciless, the weight of awareness crushing me. I could hear Han calling for another unit of ONEG, another round of fluids. The OR was being prepped again. This Lena was unstable, fading, and yet here, in Bay 1, the vitals looked better. The numbers ticked upward, pressure creeping into the 90s, heart rate easing down, as if the Lena who wasn't there was stabilizing. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the electrodes off the phantom gurney and throw the monitor against the wall. Instead, I reached for the scrap of paper I'd seen earlier, shoved into the pocket of her jeans when she first came in. I'd forgotten it in the chaos, but now, it was still there, crumpled near the edge of the bed rail where her jeans had brushed. My fingers shook as I pulled it free. It was damp with blood, the ink smeared but legible, a name scrawled in uneven letters, Micah. Beneath it, half a sentence, "Wait by the river," and then it tore off. I stared at it, my mouth dry. Wait by the river, the words Lena had whispered earlier, and now, written in her hand, or someone's. I thought of her son, 6 years old. I thought of the paramedics' voice, saying they'd found her wandering near the river after losing her. And I thought of the way she had looked past me in the hallway, eyes fixed on something I couldn't see, insisting the voice wasn't hers. I tucked the note into my glove, as if holding it close could anchor me to something real. Then I turned back to the phantom gurney, just as the monitor skipped a beat, a flat tone wailing for one long, merciless second before returning to a rhythm. And that's when the empty mattress shifted, just slightly, like the pressure of a body turning under sheets. I froze, breath caught. And in the silence that followed, I heard something impossible. A whisper, faint but clear. Right next to me, though, the bay was empty. I'm not supposed to be here. My legs nearly gave out. My hand went to the rail for support. I wanted to run, to get Han, to bring someone, anyone, to witness this. But I couldn't move. Because if I left, I feared that whatever tether existed between these two Lenas would snap. And one of them would be gone forever. Which Lena is real? What if they both are? The question circled once again, and I knew the night wasn't finished breaking the rules. Which Lena is real? What if they both are? Those words had stopped feeling like questions and started feeling like a diagnosis. The kind of statement you can't treat, can't chart, can't explain to anyone without being dismissed as sleep-deprived or slipping. and maybe I was slipping. Maybe the night had finally worn down the gears that grind you into a functioning trauma nurse. But when the whisper came again, when the air right beside me breathed words into the shape of my ear, I knew I wasn't imagining it. I'm not supposed to be here. Her voice, Lena's, gentle but insistent, like a confession she had rehearsed 1,000 times in silence and finally allowed to escape. I turned my head slowly, terrified of confirming the emptiness I already knew was there. The bay was still vacant, but the monitor kept insisting on life. The IV still ran as if through muscle and vein, and the mattress sagged ever so slightly, like a body-shaped dent in time itself. From Bay 2 came the frantic chorus of resuscitation. Hans clipped orders, the whoosh of the bear hugger blanket, suction pulling fluid from lungs that wanted to drown themselves. The Lena there was real, undeniably real, because her blood-spattered gloves and her pulse jumped weakly under fingertips. And yet here I stood, listening to the ghost of her voice. I reached down to the note still tucked in my glove. Micah, wait by the river. The words carried weight now, like coordinates to a truth I wasn't ready to know. I imagined a boy no taller than my shoulder, sitting on the muddy edge of the St. Augustine River, legs folded, waiting for a mother who might never come home. Was he real too? Or just another echo? Like this Lena? Why are you here? I whispered back, my own voice sounding alien in the empty bay. The mattress shifted again, just slightly. Then the whisper, I can't leave him. The chill that spread through me wasn't the sterile kind of the hospital air vents. It was colder, heavier, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes you want to flee from your own skin. Hans' voice rose, sharp enough to cut my trance. She's crashing! The words slammed into me like paddles delivering a jolt. I rushed into Bay 2. Lena, the living Lena, was convulsing against the restraints, eyes rolled back, skin the waxy gray of someone circling the drain. The monitor screamed tachycardia, blood pressure unreadable. Han barked, EPI now. I drew it up with shaking hands, pushed it through her line, and prayed. Not to medicine, not to protocol, but to whatever was listening, that it would hold her here. She gasped, a wet, rattling intake that made the respiratory tech flinch. Then her head snapped toward me, eyes half-lidded, and she spoke with clarity that did not belong to someone drowning in blood loss. You found the note. My heart lurched. I wanted to deny it, but my hand went instinctively to my glove. She smiled then, a thin, eerie curve of lips, and whispered, He's waiting. The monitor steadied. Blood pressure crawled upward. Han exhaled, relief visible in the slope of his shoulders. She's back, he said, almost in disbelief. But I wasn't relieved, because I knew that in Bay 1 the monitor was showing the exact same vitals. I didn't have to look. I felt it, like a twin heartbeat in my chest. Later, after the crisis had stabilized and Lena was being wheeled toward the OR, I snuck back into Bay 1. The bed was empty. The monitor was silent. The IV bag hung drained, its line disconnected. On the mattress, where no one had been lying, was a single wet footprint, small, child-sized. I don't know what medicine has to say about that. I don't know what physics or psychology would argue. I only know that when I closed my eyes that night, I saw a boy by the river, 6 years old, waiting. And the case will always remind me that some lives don't just straddle the line between here and gone. Some lives seem to walk it twice, leaving us to wonder which version we saved, and which one is still out there, waiting by the river. The aftermath is never as dramatic as the moment itself, but it lingers in ways that cut deeper. After Lena was taken to the OR, the ER resumed its rhythm, though nothing about it felt normal. The phones kept ringing. Ambulances kept coming. Patients still pressed call buttons because their water was warm or their blankets scratchy. Life demanded attention, even when part of me was still locked in that hallway, staring at an empty gurney that had beeped out a lie. Han didn't speak of it. Not to me, not to anyone. He charted with his usual precision, though I saw his hand pause once, the pen hovering before the words settled. Later, In the break room, he rubbed his temples and muttered something about artifact readings and psychological projection. His tone was clipped, defensive, as though he needed to anchor himself to reason before reason drifted away for good. I didn't challenge him. We all have our ways of coping. Nadim, though, the CT tech, cornered me before he left at dawn. His eyes were wide, his usual sarcasm gone. I saw her, he whispered, like a confession. In both places. Don't tell me I didn't. I'll quit before I let someone convince me I imagined it. I told him I wouldn't. Because I hadn't imagined it either. But here's the thing about medicine. We build our lives on documentation, on charting, on facts recorded with timestamps and signatures. And some truths simply don't survive the chart. There's no box for patient disappeared, then reappeared in duplicate. No field for monitor tracked vitals of absence. So the night went unrecorded, except in the fragile storage of memory. I carried Lena's note with me for weeks, folded in my wallet, edges stiff with dried blood. Micah, wait by the river. Those words glowed like a warning, like an unfinished prescription written by a hand I couldn't trace. I wanted to find him. I wanted to drive to every bend in the river and search for a boy waiting on the bank. But I didn't. Maybe out of fear. Maybe out of understanding that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, because dragging them into daylight only distorts them further. Still, every time a child comes into my bay, I think of him. Every time I hear a parent whisper their child's name in desperation, I feel the tug of that riverbank pulling at me. And I think of Lena, whichever Lena we saved, whichever Lena we lost. What unsettles me most is not that she vanished, not that she returned, not even that two versions of her occupied our night. What unsettles me is how medicine, the one thing I trusted to separate illusion from fact, stood on both sides of the contradiction. Monitors, lab work, vitals, they all agreed to the lie. The machines colluded with the impossible. So I ask myself, often when I'm alone in the med room, restocking IV tubing, or scrubbing my hands raw after a code, what else have I trusted that wasn't real? How many times have the numbers obeyed physics, while reality slipped somewhere else? The ER demands you return to normalcy fast. If you linger on the things you can't explain, you lose your edge, and hesitation costs lives. So outwardly, I did what I've always done. Came back the next shift, clipped my badge to my scrub top, stocked my pockets with pens, tape, and scissors. I smiled at patients who needed warmth. I steadied hands that trembled. I charted in black and white. But inside me, the night remained vivid, like a film loop on repeat, grainy and haunting. I remember the way Lena whispered, "I'm not supposed to be here." I remember the empty mattress shifting. I remember the footprint that had no right to exist. And I know that someday, when I least expect it, I'll hear that monitor beep again in my mind, steady and relentless, and I'll ask myself the same questions. Which Lena was real? What if they both were? The case will always remind me that we don't just save lives. We brush up against whatever waits beyond them. And sometimes, if the night is dark enough, the beyond brushes back.